47 trips, that was the number on the screen. Not 5, not 12. 47 separate route histories logged by the GPS tracker synced to our car over a period of 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which my wife, Serena, had told me calmly and without hesitation on at least 4 separate occasions that she had barely left the house. I was standing in the kitchen at 6:43 in the morning, still in the shirt I'd traveled home in, a cold cup of coffee going pale beside the sink. The app was open on my phone because I'd been about to check traffic. That was the only reason I'd opened it. 43 seconds of misdirected habit. And then the route history tab was there and I pressed it before I thought about what I might find, and the screen filled with pins, 47 pins. Each one a different day, each one a different route. And 14 of them, exactly 14, terminating at the same address on the western edge of Caldwell Heights. The same postcode, the same street, the same building. I put the phone face down on the counter. I picked up the cold coffee, and I stood there very still for what the clock later told me was 11 minutes. I did not feel rage, not yet. What I felt was more architectural than that, the sensation of a weight-bearing wall revealing, quietly and irrevocably, that it had been hollow the entire time. What Serena did not know, what nobody in her family knew, was that the building at that address in Caldwell Heights was mine. Not in the sense that I had visited it, not in the sense that I had a passing professional interest. I mean that I owned it. I had designed it from the foundation played up, funded the land acquisition, managed every contractor negotiation across 19 months of development, and held a 67% majority stake in the limited liability company that controlled the title deed. The Cole Quarter, that was its name. A $23.7 million mixed-use development, 8 stories, 32 residential units on the upper floors, ground floor commercial tenancies already pre-leased to 3 high-end operators at rents the market hadn't seen in this city's history. My name was not on any public-facing documentation. It never is. That is how I work. That is how I have always worked. I am an architect by training and by nature. I build structures designed to last, and I do not build them for applause. I build them because the work itself demands to be done, and because a foundation laid in silence is the only kind that holds. Serena had been visiting my building for 6 weeks, and she had no idea it belonged to her husband. Before we go any further into Nathan's story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. It's always extraordinary to us how far these stories travel, how many people in how many different cities and countries find themselves in them somehow. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It means more than you know. And if this is the kind of story that stays with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories just like it. Now let's go back to Nathan Cole, to a marriage that looked from the outside like everything. And to the morning a GPS app began to tell him what everything actually was. I need to tell you about the man I was before that morning. Because the story doesn't make sense without him. I grew up in Hartwell, a working-class suburb that the kind of people Serena grew up around would not have known how to find on a map. My father was a construction foreman. My mother worked 2 jobs until I was 16 and then 1 job after that, because by 16 I was contributing enough to make the difference. I was the first person in my family's history to attend university. I studied architecture on a partial scholarship and a full complement of debt that took me 9 years to retire. I did not grow up understanding money as a birthright. I grew up understanding it as a consequence of precision, of patience, of building things that other people needed. I met Serena Hargrove at an industry dinner 7 years ago. She was 31, I was 34. She was warm in a way I had not expected from someone who'd grown up the way she had in the Hargrove house in Whitmore Park, with Gerald Hargrove's money as the wallpaper and his ambitions as the load-bearing structure of every room. She laughed easily, she asked questions and actually listened to the answers. On our 3rd date, she told me she'd been tired her whole life of men who talked about wealth rather than work, and that I was the first person she'd met in years who seemed to understand the difference. I believed her. I want you to understand that clearly. I genuinely, completely believed her. We married 18 months later, a small ceremony. Serena had wanted something larger, but I had asked for small and she had agreed, and I remember thinking that this was the kind of compromise that made a marriage real rather than performed. Her father Gerald attended in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He shook my hand at the reception with the grip of a man who has made a decision and is not yet ready to announce it. Her brother Dominic stood in the receiving line and told me I'd done well for myself, with the particular intonation that means the opposite. For 3 years, the marriage was good. Not perfect, no honest account of a marriage uses the word perfect, but good in the ways that matter. We moved into a house I had designed myself in Linden Cross, a mid-range neighborhood that I chose because the bones of it were right and the bones of a home are the only thing that lasts. Serena decorated it beautifully. We had a routine, we had inside jokes, we had a shared language for the ordinary life we were building. The erosion started so slowly that I did not notice it happening. It started, I think, the year Hargrove Developments, Gerald's firm, began to struggle. 3 projects had run over budget. A flagship residential tower on the east side had sold at a loss. Gerald was not the kind of man who processed financial difficulty quietly, and the pressure radiated outward from him like heat from damaged infrastructure, invisible from a distance, but felt immediately by anyone standing close. Serena started coming home from family dinners quieter than she'd gone. She started bringing up money in ways she never had before. Not in arguments, not directly, but in small, persistent observations about what we had and what we didn't. What we drove, where we ate, the holiday we hadn't taken. I was, at the time, in the middle of the most complex project of my career. I did not have the bandwidth to see what was happening to us. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that the foundations I had built were strong enough to hold. I was wrong about all of it. The GPS app was not the first thing. I want to be precise about that. It was the thing that confirmed the shape of something I had been sensing in peripheral vision for several months without allowing myself to look at it directly. The first thing was a name, Callum Reeve. An interior consultant, Serena had explained when I'd seen the name on her phone screen as she tilted it away from me. She was considering hiring someone to redesign the upstairs study. It was a reasonable explanation. I accepted it. I did not write the name down. I did not search it. I filed it in the part of my mind that stores things I have chosen not to examine, and I went back to my drawings. The second thing was a receipt. Not hidden, left on the kitchen counter among the ordinary detritus of a Tuesday evening. Dinner for 2 at Meridian, $347 before service. I had not been to Meridian that Tuesday. I had been in Birmingham for a structural consultation that had run until 10 o'clock. When I asked about it, Serena said she had taken her friend Clara to celebrate a promotion. The explanation was specific and warm and entirely plausible. I accepted it. I did not ask to see the credit card statement. The third thing was the car. 4 weeks before the morning with the GPS app, I had returned from a 5-day trip to review groundwork progress on a project in the north. I'd arrived home on a Friday afternoon to find the car exactly where Serena said it would be, in the driveway, angled slightly left the way she always parked it. I thought nothing of it. But something small snagged at the edge of my attention. The seat position was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, 2 centimeters further back than where I leave it when I drive last. Serena is 3 inches shorter than me. She always moves the seat forward. Someone taller had been driving. I adjusted the seat, parked the car, and went inside. I told myself it was nothing. I made dinner. I was wrong. Then came the morning with the GPS app. I stood at the kitchen counter with the phone in my hand and scrolled through 47 route histories with the careful, clinical attention of a man who has spent his professional life reading structural surveys. I did not rush. I documented each route. I noted the frequency, an average of 1.1 trips per day, Monday through Saturday, across 6 weeks, with a 3-day gap in the third week that corresponded to a trip Serena had taken to visit her university friend in Edinburgh. I noted the destination cluster, 14 visits to the same building in Caldwell Heights. I noted the timing. The journeys to that address always began between 10:15 and 11:40 in the morning, and the return legs always ended before 2:30 p.m. Well within the window of school hours for a neighborhood that had a lot of them. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I made a fresh cup and I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the wall for a long time. Not because I did not know what to do, because I already knew exactly what to do and I needed a moment to grieve the version of events where I was wrong. I was not wrong, and so I began. The decision I made in that kitchen was the same decision I have made my entire professional life when a structure reveals a fault. You do not immediately demolish. You survey first. You take measurements. You understand the full load distribution before you touch a single beam, because a careless response to a structural failure causes more damage than the fault itself. I told Serena nothing. I gave no sign. I continued to be the husband I had always been: present, attentive, reliable. And while I was being that husband, I was also building a complete and evidenced account of everything I was looking at. Over the following 4 weeks, the picture assembled itself with a precision that I found, in equal measure, devastating and clarifying. Callum Reeve was not an interior consultant. He was 37 years old, the son of a Whitmore Park family that the Hargroves had known for 2 decades, and he had spent the last 3 years working as a property developer's agent, specializing, specifically, in the Caldwell Heights area. He drove a black Range Rover. He was, by objective measure, a man who understood money as a birthright. The building he had been visiting with my wife was the Cole Quarter, my building, still under final fit-out. Still listed under the development company's name, with no public attribution to me personally. Serena had been accompanying Callum Reeve on property tour of a building she had no idea her husband owned. I absorbed this information the way a foundation absorbs compression, silently, completely, and without visible deformation. The first humiliation came on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the GPS morning. Gerald Hargrove held his annual spring dinner at the family home in Whitmore Park. These dinners were performances, Gerald at the head of the table, conducting the conversation the way a poor conductor conducts an orchestra. Loudly, without listening, and with a persistent conviction that everyone in the room was grateful to be there. I had been seated, as always, at the far end of the table from Gerald. This was not accidental. In 9 years of Saturday dinners, I had never once been seated within comfortable conversation distance of my father-in-law. The architecture of Gerald's table told you everything about Gerald's assessment of you. Halfway through the main course, the conversation turned to the Cole Quarter. A business associate of Gerald's, a man named Forsyth, who ran a mid-tier commercial letting agency, had apparently mentioned it at a luncheon that week. The development had begun to attract serious attention. The pre-leasing numbers had leaked to a property trade publication. There was talk of it being shortlisted for a regional architectural award. Extraordinary project, Forsyth's account apparently had it. Whoever's behind it has kept themselves very well hidden. Gerald received this information at his dinner table with the particular displeasure of a man hearing about a success he had no part in. He had, I knew, submitted a proposal for the same land parcel 18 months ago. His firm had been outbid by a margin so clean that the planning office had, according to Marcus, actually paused to double-check the submission. Anonymous vanity project, Gerald announced, cutting through his venison with practiced dismissiveness. Whoever it is doesn't have the spine to put their name on it. In my experience, anonymous money is either inherited or embarrassed. Usually both. The table laughed. I drank my wine. I touched the small titanium compass in my jacket pocket, the one my mentor Edmund Hale had given me the week I graduated, the one I had carried every day for 14 years, and I felt its weight, its cool precision, and I said nothing. The second humiliation came from Dominic. Serena's younger brother was 32 years old and had spent that 32 years mistaking the advantages of his upbringing for evidence of his own intelligence. He worked nominally in Gerald's firm, occupying a title whose responsibilities were deliberately kept vague enough to survive scrutiny. He had never, to my knowledge, designed anything, built anything, or concluded a negotiation without his father's money providing the final argument. He had also never in 9 years missed an opportunity to remind me of the distance between where I had started and where the Hargroves had always been. The family used a group chat. It was called, without apparent irony, the Hargroves, a name that had never been changed to include my surname in 9 years of marriage. Dominic was its most active participant. He used it the way a less intelligent person uses wit, as a substitute for thought. On the Tuesday after Gerald's dinner, Dominic posted a link to the trade publication article about the Cole Quarter. Beneath it, he wrote, "Dad reckons whoever built this has more secrecy than substance. Flash development with no one willing to sign their name to it. Bit like designing a house you can't afford to live in, eh, Nathan?" There were 3 laughing face emojis from Serena's mother, Patricia. There was no reply from Serena. I read the message, put my phone in my drawer, and returned to the elevation drawings open on my desk. I made a note of the date, the exact wording, and the time it was sent. 14:23 on a Tuesday. I added it to the ledger I had been keeping in the small brown notebook in my desk drawer, the same notebook I used for site measurements, because some things deserve the same level of precision. The third humiliation was the worst, not because of what was said, but because of where and how I came to hear it. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter one evening and gone to my study to review drawings. 20 minutes later, walking back through the hallway, I heard Serena's voice from the living room, the particular tone of a person who believes they are alone in a house having a conversation they would not choose to have otherwise. I stopped in the hallway. I did not move. I am not proud of this. I am also not ashamed of it. She was on the phone to someone. From the easy familiarity of her register, I understood it was Dominic or possibly Callum Reeve. The door was not fully closed. I heard 7 sentences clearly. I will give you 4 of them. He doesn't actually know what money looks like. He knows what work looks like. It's not the same thing. Dad's right. The ceiling is the ceiling. You can't build an empire on a draftsman's salary, regardless of what he thinks he's doing. And then, the one I wrote down in the notebook as soon as I was back in my study. He's a good man. He's a good man the way a good tool is good, reliable, quiet, useful, but you don't build a life with a tool, you build a life with a partner. She said this without venom. That was the thing that landed most heavily. There was no cruelty in her voice, only the flat, conversational certainty of a woman who has arrived at a conclusion and is simply reporting it. I sat at my desk in the dark for a long time after that. Not because the words broke something in me, they didn't. They completed a picture I had been drawing in fragments for several months, and a completed picture, however painful, is always better than an incomplete one. An architect cannot build from a partial survey. He needs the full dimensions of a space before he can decide what to do with it. I had the full dimensions now. I picked up the titanium compass and held it in my palm and thought about what Edmund Hale had told me the day he gave it to me. He said, "A compass does not tell you where to go, it tells you which direction you are already facing. Everything after that is a decision." I knew which direction I was facing. I made the decision. The fourth humiliation was the most public, and Gerald delivered it with the casual confidence of a man who has never once considered that the person he is dismissing might be more powerful than him. It was a Sunday lunch at the Hargrove house. Serena's cousin was visiting from Edinburgh, a convivial, harmless young woman named Fiona who treated me with the straightforward warmth of someone who had not absorbed the family ideology about what I was worth. Also present was Gerald's business associate Forsyth, whose company Gerald was apparently attempting to bring into the orbit of a new commercial development proposal. At some point during the lunch, Forsyth asked me what I was currently working on. It was a genuine question. He had no subtext, no agenda. He was simply making table conversation with the son-in-law he had been placed next to. Before I could answer, Gerald spoke from the head of the table. "Nathan does residential work, bespoke residential, good, solid, reliable work." A pause, precisely calibrated. "The kind of work that keeps the lights on." Forsyth smiled politely. Dominic's grin across the table was the grin of a man who had been waiting for that particular line. "Dad's very traditional about the hierarchy," Dominic said, apparently to the table at large. "Residential, commercial, civic, he thinks you have to earn the right to move up the ladder." "A sound principle," said Gerald, cutting his lamb. "Nathan might get there eventually," Dominic continued. "Give him another decade." He was 32 years old and had never built anything. I looked at Forsyth, who had asked me an honest question and received someone else's answer. "Residential mostly," I confirmed, "and some other things." I put down my fork. I touched the compass in my pocket. I drank my wine. Fiona caught my eye across the table and gave me a look that contained something like apology. I gave her a small nod and turned the conversation back to her, and the moment passed. I added Gerald's words to the notebook when I got home, the exact phrasing, the date, the audience, the tone. I was very close to ready. There is a room in my office building that nobody enters except me and Marcus Webb. It is on the 4th floor, facing west, and in the late afternoon the light comes through the windows in long flat bands that make the drawings on the wall look almost like typography. On the desk there is a monitor, a set of bound project files, and a titanium paperweight that Marcus gave me the day the Cole Quarter planning permission came through. That evening, the night after Gerald's Sunday lunch, I sat in that room for 3 hours. I opened the project management portal and looked at the Cole Quarter in its entirety for the first time in several weeks. Not the drawings, I know those by heart. The numbers. The development had cost £14.2 million to build and finance. The pre-lease agreements on the commercial ground floor had been signed at rates that would return £890,000 per annum at full occupancy. The 32 residential units were being brought to market at an average asking price of £485,000, creating a projected gross sales revenue of £15.52 million from that floor plate alone. The overall project return, conservative, based on Marcus's most recent modeling, was £23.7 million gross value, against which the development costs, loan repayments, and professional fees left a net position of approximately £7.4 million. My 67% stake, my signature on the founding documents of Cole Quarter Developments Limited, registered at Companies House 14 months ago, buried in the unread columns of a public database that nobody in the Hargrove family had ever thought to search. I sat with those numbers for a long time, then I opened the folder Marcus had prepared, the one we had first discussed 2 weeks after the GPS morning, when I had driven to his office and laid the brown notebook on his desk and told him everything. The folder had a plain white label on the front. It contained 12 documents. I read through all 12 again slowly, the way I read structural surveys for what it tells me about what comes next. I touched the titanium compass. I set it on the desk beside the folder, and I began to write the invitation. Marcus Webb is 51 years old, a corporate attorney by training and a builder by temperament, which is to say that he understands structures, legal, financial, human, with the same instinctive precision that I apply to physical ones. We had worked together for 6 years before he became, in any meaningful sense, my friend. The friendship came later, incrementally, the way real friendships between serious people always do, built on accumulated evidence of each other's competence and character, rather than on the warmth of first impressions. He was the first person I told, the only person I told. He listened to everything without interrupting, which is one of the things I respect most about him. He did not reach for a legal strategy before he'd heard the full picture. He did not offer sympathy until he understood the situation well enough for the sympathy to be accurate. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Cole Quarter is 3 weeks from practical completion." 17 days, I confirmed. And the launch event was always going to be the mechanism for announcing the development company's identity. That was always the plan. He looked at me across the desk for a moment, then at the notebook, then back at me. "So we don't change the plan," he said. "We expand it." It was a clean piece of thinking, which is why I had come to him. The Cole Quarter launch had been scheduled for 3 weeks' time, a private evening event at the building itself, for the people whose opinions and professional networks mattered to its ongoing commercial success. Architects, investors, the pre-lease tenants, key figures from the city's property and cultural scene. It was always going to be the moment the Cole Quarter, and by extension its creator, stepped into full public view. What Marcus proposed was simple. We would extend the invitation list. We would invite Gerald Hargrove as a property industry figure, which he legitimately was. We would invite Dominic Hargrove as a professional courtesy, given his nominal role at Hargrove Developments. And I would personally ensure, through Serena, that the family understood this was an industry event of some significance. One that, given the recent attention the Cole Quarter had attracted in trade publications, would be attended by many of the key figures in the city's commercial property world. Gerald, whose professional vanity was the most reliable thing about him, would not be able to stay away. "He'll bring Forsyth," Marcus noted. "I'm counting on it," I said. Marcus picked up a pen, his particular habit when he has decided something. He clicked it once. "I'll have everything ready to present by 7:15 on the night, all 12 documents. Hard copies and digital." 7:15, I confirmed. He looked at the notebook again. "You've been very thorough," he said. It was not a compliment and it was not a criticism. It was a statement of observed fact, delivered with the particular warmth of a man who has been keeping his own private assessment of events and is relieved to find it confirmed. "I'm an architect," I said. "I measure things." The invitation I sent to Serena was handwritten. Not because I lack access to email, but because a handwritten invitation to an event of this kind communicates a level of formality and gravity that a digital message cannot. I left it on the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning beside her coffee, and I was gone before she woke. It read, "The Cole Quarter launch, Friday the 14th, 7 p.m. the building, Caldwell Heights. I would like you to be there. Please ask your father and Dominic to come. This is important to me." That was all. I watched, from the small camera I had installed in the hallway after the GPS morning, within full legal parameters, on property I owned, as Marcus had confirmed, as she read it at the kitchen table. Her expression went through several phases, first an absent, distracted reading, then a rereading, slower, then a pause, then she picked up her phone. She texted someone. I did not know the recipient. The text read, "He's doing some kind of launch event for a project at Caldwell Heights. He wants us all there. Do you know about this one?" The reply came within 4 minutes. I could not see its content, but I saw Serena's face as she read it, and I saw the small, complicated movement that crossed it, something between confirmation and unease. She set the invitation down. She looked at the ceiling. And then she typed one more message to whoever it was, a single word from the speed of it. I did not need to see the word. I knew what it was. Over the following 9 days, I prepared with the same methodical attention I give to every structural project. Marcus assembled the 12 documents, the development company registration, the planning approval with my named signature as lead architect, the project finance agreements showing my equity position, the pre-lease contracts bearing the Cole Quarter Developments Limited letterhead, the project timeline with my personal correspondence thread spanning 19 months, and the architectural award longlist announcement published 3 days earlier in the trade press, which named me explicitly for the first time. I also gathered the other documents, the ones that had nothing to do with architecture. A private investigator, engaged through a firm Marcus had used before, properly licensed and operating within all legal boundaries, had over 6 weeks produced a thorough account of Callum Reeves' relationship with my wife. The account did not contain anything I needed to see beyond what I already knew, but it contained dates and times and locations, and these were the items I needed. I asked Marcus to print everything twice, one set for the evening, one set for the solicitor. On the Thursday before the launch, I drove to Caldwell Heights and walked through the Cole Quarter alone for the first time since the fit-out had been completed. The building was everything I had built it to be. The proportions were right. The light moved through the atrium the way I had modeled it moving 14 months ago on a screen in a room that no one else had access to. The materials spoke to each other the way materials should, not performing, not showing off, simply existing in a relationship of mutual structural necessity. I stood in the atrium for a long time. I put the titanium compass on the polished concrete floor at the center of the space, a private ritual, the kind that requires no audience, and I looked at it sitting there in the last light of the afternoon. Then I picked it up, put it in my pocket, and went home to prepare. I arrived at the Cole Quarter at 6:45 p.m. on Friday the 14th. The building was already lit. The event team, a small professional group Marcus had sourced, had done everything correctly. The atrium glowed with the warm, specific light that architectural events require. Bright enough to see the detail of the space, warm enough to make everyone in it feel slightly better about themselves than they actually are. There were 83 guests on the list. By 6:55, I estimated that 70 of them had arrived. Gerald Hargrove arrived at 7:02 p.m. with Forsyth beside him, which was what I had anticipated. He was in a dark navy suit that he wore with the ease of a man for whom clothing is a form of professional armor. He took in the atrium with the expression of a property developer, assessing ceiling heights, floor area, finish quality, before he had assessed it as a guest. Old habits. Dominic arrived 3 minutes later, already in conversation with someone on his phone, which he put away when he saw the room. He was dressed well, better than usual, and he was scanning the space with the particular alertness of someone who has been told this event matters and is trying to decide whether that information changes anything for him. Serena was with him. She was wearing a deep green dress I had not seen before. She was beautiful. She always was. I noticed this the way I notice structural details in a building that is about to be demolished accurately with something like mourning and without allowing it to change what I am about to do. She saw me across the atrium. She smiled. The smile had a quality to it, an anxiety underneath the warmth that told me she still did not know. She had asked in the car on the way over whose project this was. I had said, "A new development, a significant one. I'd wanted it to be a surprise." I smiled back. "It's beautiful," she said when she reached me. "Nathan, this is extraordinary. Whose is it?" "Let's have a drink first," I said. Gerald arrived at my side a moment later with Forsyth in tow, and he took in the atrium again, this time, I thought, with something closer to genuine appreciation, which from Gerald was as close to respect as architecture was ever going to get. "Impressive space," he said, not to me, to Forsyth. "Isn't it?" I said. He looked at me briefly, then back at the room. "Do you know who's responsible for it?" he asked. "I do," I said, and I excused myself to welcome the other guests. Beat 11, the controlled detonation at 7:15 p.m. Marcus Webb walked through the entrance of the coal quarter carrying a black leather portfolio case that I had left in his office 3 days earlier. He crossed the atrium with the unhurried certainty of a man who has prepared for this moment and finds the preparation sufficient. He nodded to me once. I nodded back. He took a position near the east wall. I picked up a glass from a passing tray. I moved to the center of the atrium, to the exact point where, the day before, I had placed the compass on the floor. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room quietened in the way rooms do when someone who does not seek attention steps forward and takes it. "Thank you all for being here," I said. "I'll keep this brief because the building speaks for itself better than I can, and I've never enjoyed being the loudest thing in a room." A few smiles. The room was paying attention. The coal quarter has been 14 months in the making. Some of you have been aware of it from early stages. Most of you are seeing it properly for the first time tonight. I wanted to gather the people in this city whose opinion of built environment actually matters before this project goes public in the broader sense. Because the story of how this building came to exist is one I think is worth telling, and I wanted to tell it here in person rather than through a press release. I looked at Gerald. He was holding his glass with the careful stillness of a man who has just started to feel something he doesn't yet have a name for. The development company behind the coal quarter is called Coal Quarter Developments Limited. It was incorporated 14 months ago. The majority stakeholder, 67% to be exact, is me, Nathan Cole. This is my building. The room absorbed this. I watched several expressions shift simultaneously. The property professionals in the room, the ones who had been operating under the assumption that the anonymous developer behind the most discussed project of the year was a major institutional player or a wealthy foreign investor, went through a rapid recalibration. Forsyth's mouth opened slightly and then closed. Gerald's expression was more complex. It moved through surprise, then a fast recalculation, then, and this was the one I had been waiting for, the particular devastating quality of a man who realizes in real time that something he publicly dismissed was far larger than he could have imagined. Dominic had gone very still. Serena was looking at me as though she were seeing a different person standing where her husband had been. I was not done. "I want to tell you something about how this building was funded," I said. "Because it speaks to something that I think is worth understanding in a room full of people who work in this industry." I took the compass from my pocket. I set it on the small table beside me. "I am the son of a construction foreman from Hartwell. I attended university on a partial scholarship. I graduated with £31,000 in debt, which I retired over 9 years of work. I did not have family capital. I did not have a network that predated my career. What I had was the ability to read a structure, financial, physical, human, and understand where the load was being carried and where the weakness was." I looked at Gerald. "Some months ago at a dinner table, I was told that good, solid residential work was the kind that keeps the lights on, that it was a ceiling, not a foundation, that it takes a decade to earn the right to move up the ladder." Gerald's jaw moved slightly. He had recognized his own words in someone else's mouth. He knew I'd heard them. "I want to read something," I said. I took the brown notebook from my inside jacket pocket. I opened it to the first marked page. Tuesday, the 11th. 14:23, group message, family chat. Quote, "He's like a designer who can't afford to live in his own buildings. A bit like designing a house you can't afford to live in, eh, Nathan?" I looked up at Dominic. He had color in his face now. "That was you, 6 weeks ago." Dominic said nothing. "The same dinner, Gerald." I turned a page. "Bespoke residential, good, solid, reliable work, the kind that keeps the lights on. You can't build an empire on a draftsman's salary." The room had gone very quiet, not the quiet of discomfort, the quiet of people paying extremely close attention. I closed the notebook. "This building," I said, "is the empire. It has a gross development value of £23.7 million. It is fully pre-let on the commercial floor. The residential units go to market on Monday at an average asking price of £485,000 each. It was designed, funded, and delivered by a draftsman from Hartwell, with a draftsman's salary plus 19 months of not telling anyone what he was actually building." I let that stand in the room for a moment, then I looked at Forsyth. "Hargrove Development submitted a proposal for this land parcel 18 months ago. They were outbid by a margin of £800,000. I want to make sure that's clearly understood for anyone in this room who may have been told a different version of why that bid was unsuccessful." Forsyth was very still. He looked at Gerald. Gerald did not look back. "Marcus," I said. Marcus crossed the room and set the leather portfolio on the table beside the compass. He opened it and placed a set of documents on the surface, face up. The development company registration, the equity documentation, the planning approval, the architectural award long list, 12 documents, each one a different load-bearing piece of the same structure. These are available for anyone in this room who wants to review them. Marcus is a corporate attorney. He will be happy to answer questions about any aspect of the documentation. I picked up the compass from the table. I held it for a moment, then I placed it gently on top of the stack of documents. My mentor gave me this 14 years ago. He told me a compass doesn't tell you where to go, it tells you which direction you're already facing. I have been facing this direction my entire career. Some people in this room have been standing close enough to see me working and did not notice what I was building. I understand that. Sometimes the most important structures are the ones that look ordinary until they're complete. I looked at Serena for the last time. She was not crying. She was doing something harder than crying. She was thinking, and the thinking was visible on her face in a way that her feelings, usually carefully managed, could not contain. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because this is the part of these stories that most often gets simplified. I did not feel the vindication I had perhaps expected to feel. I felt something closer to the profound, exhausted release of a structure that has been under load for too long, finally reaching equilibrium. Not joy, not vengeance. Clarity. Simply, cleanly, irrevocably clarity. "Enjoy the building," I said. "It was designed to last." I picked up my glass. I walked to the east wall where Marcus was standing. He said nothing. He picked up his own glass. We stood together in the atrium of the building I had built, and the room around us made the kind of noise a room makes when it is trying to decide what it has just witnessed. What followed in the weeks and months after the launch was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was the quiet, mechanical operation of consequence, structural, not spectacular. Gerald Hargrove's professional standing in the city's property community did not collapse overnight. It eroded, which is worse. Forsyth withdrew from the joint venture proposal within 9 days of the launch event, citing in his formal correspondence a need to reassess strategic alignment, the language of a man who has decided to quietly move away from something without explaining why. 2 other business associates of Gerald's who had been at the launch followed Forsyth's lead over the following month. Gerald was not destroyed. He was diminished, which for a man whose entire self-architecture was built on the perception of scale and power was a more exact punishment. He had told a room full of industry people that Nathan Cole did bespoke residential work that kept the lights on. The room now knew what Nathan Cole had actually built. Gerald knew that they knew. He would spend the rest of his professional life in that knowledge. Dominic's professional consequences were more direct. Without the reflected gravity of his father's standing to borrow, he discovered that his own was negligible. His title at Hargrove Developments became harder to defend when the firm's project pipeline contracted. Within 4 months, he was running a much smaller operation, 3 staff, a back-office function, no client-facing role. He was not laughed at publicly because I had not sought that. He was simply revealed, which is what happens to people whose substance was always borrowed. Patricia Hargrove, Serena's mother, lost, more than anything, the social architecture of her self-image. She had built her identity partly on the understanding that her family occupied a certain level of the world. The launch event had rearranged those levels in front of an audience that mattered to her. She adjusted over time with more grace than Gerald. She sent me a short note 3 months later which said only, "I misjudged the situation. I am sorry for my part in that." It was 3 sentences and it was the most honest communication I had ever received from her. Forsyth, for what it is worth, called Marcus 4 weeks after the launch and asked whether Cole Quarter Developments was taking on commercial partners for future projects. Marcus told him we would consider all appropriate approaches in due course. The Cole Quarter sold all 32 residential units within 11 weeks of going to market. The average achieved price was £497,000, 12,000 above asking. The commercial tenancies opened to strong reviews in the trade press. The architectural award longlist became a shortlist. I did not attend the ceremony. I sent Marcus, who gave a short, excellent speech. The solicitor's letter was delivered in the 3rd week after the launch. Serena and I had not lived under the same roof since the night of the event. She had gone to her mother's house that night and had not returned, and I had made no request either way. The dissolution process, when it was formally initiated, was handled with the same methodical precision I apply to any structural project, professionally, without unnecessary noise, and with a clear focus on the outcome rather than the process. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, approximately 7 weeks after that. It was handwritten on plain cream paper, in the particular handwriting that I had been reading for 9 years and would have recognized anywhere. It had no header, no date, no address. It began simply. It said, "I am not writing to ask for anything. I want you to understand that clearly before you read the rest of this. I am not writing to change anything. What has happened is what happened, and I am not asking you to alter your view of it. I am writing because I know what I said on that phone call. I know you heard it. I knew the morning after the launch that you had heard it, not because of anything you said, but because of the specific things you did not say and the way you looked at me when you said them. You have always known more than you showed. I understand now that I mistook this for a limitation rather than what it actually was. You were a good man, not a good tool, a good man. The difference matters, and I did not honor it, and I am sorry." I read the letter standing at the kitchen counter. The same counter where, months before, I had stood with a cold cup of coffee and a phone screen full of GPS pins and watched the weight-bearing wall of my marriage reveal that it had been hollow. I set the letter down. I did not reply. I want to be honest about that. I did not reply, not because I had no feelings about it, but because I understood that some things are not answered by words. They are answered by what you choose to build next. I put the letter in the drawer where I keep the brown notebook and the titanium compass, and then I went back to my desk because there was work to do. There is a thing that happens in my profession when a building is complete. You walk through it for the last time as its maker, before the tenants arrive, before the occupation transforms it into something other than what you drew, and you experience it in the specific silence of a structure that is finished. It does not ask you for anything. It does not need you anymore. It stands on its own foundations as it was always going to, and its relationship to the ground beneath it is the only one that will ever truly matter. I had spent the better part of 2 years building the Cole Quarter in silence, in the margins of a life that the people closest to me had decided told a complete story about who I was. They had read the visible structure, the house, the car, the title, the table position at Sunday lunch, and concluded they knew everything about the load distribution. They did not know about the room on the 4th floor. They did not know about Marcus or the documents or the small brown notebook or the compass. They had not looked at the foundations. This is the thing I think about most now. Not the betrayal, that is over and its consequences are what they are. Not the reveal, that moment served its purpose and I have no particular attachment to it. What I think about is the nature of foundations. The way the most important structural work is always invisible from street level. The way a building that looks modest from the outside can be carrying an extraordinary load. The way the people most certain about what something is worth are usually the ones who have never bothered to examine what it's built on. I built on silence. I built on patience. I built on the understanding that what a structure is made of matters more than what it looks like in the early stages, and that a foundation laid correctly will outlast every opinion about it. The Cole Quarter is still standing. It will be standing long after this story is forgotten. That is enough. Before you go, I want to ask you something. I've thought about this a great deal and I still don't have a clean answer. If you were Nathan, would you have confronted Serena privately, given her the chance to tell the truth before the launch, before the public exposure? Or was the public reveal the only response proportional to a private betrayal that had been conducted in plain sight for months? There's no clean answer. That's exactly why I'm asking. Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the structures you're building in your own life and whether the people closest to you can actually see what those foundations are made of, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching.